So my plan for today is to talk about, why purpose, out of all the other motivation tactics we can use in our lives and all of the 10-step plans you read in blogs everywhere, why purpose to pull us through life, to inspire a striving to be someone who contributes to the world in a positive way. How do we use it to transform our lives, our work, and if you're an organizational leader, your organization as well. And then I want to talk about the 3 research-backed beliefs of purposeful people as individuals and organizations. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are going to be directed towards you as an individual, but if you're an organizational leader, remember that organizations are just individuals who organize around something. And so taking these strategies that I'm going to talk about and applying them to work teams and organizations can be equally as powerful as it is for the individual. And then finally, I'm going to give you some strategies to learn and teach a purposeful mindset from my work with organizations, from my work with individuals, and from my own personal experience, and also from the research. And then how do we overcome the barriers to meaningful work and purposeful living? And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. But I do want to add one more disclaimer here. I am not like I don't do this every day. I don't wake up every day. I'm like, oh my gosh, like here we go. I'm going to change the world, like when I make my coffee. But it's an aspiration. If we have this aspiration to continue to awaken and live and align our lives with purpose, our why, it can become powerful and inspire this type of striving. And so before I move on, I want to very much clarify a couple of things. You may have seen a lot of TED Talks and Harvard Business Review articles about purpose, and I'm sad about that because purpose is sort of becoming a buzzword, the next business self-help buzzword. And that's troubling because purpose is not a fad. It's not anything new. It's a fundamental human need and desire that has existed since the beginning of time. Some researchers and philosophers would say it actually is the aspect that makes us human, is that we search for meaning and purpose. Viktor Frankl, in the book Man's Search for Meaning, which I highly recommend if you're interested in more about the psychology behind purpose and meaning, he was a concentration camp survivor, and he was in a concentration camp, and he was simultaneously a psychiatrist in his life outside the camp. And what he did was he studied concentration camp prisoners, which are in probably the most awful, hellish situation a human being could be in. And what he found was that those who lived, those who survived, consistently thought about a reason for being, a reason for living that was outside themselves, whether it was a family, whether it was their occupation, whether it was their service to the world that they had to stop doing, whether it was a loved one outside the camp. When you focus on something, a why that's outside of yourself, he actually found that people were more likely to survive. And actually modern research agrees. And he invoked Nietzsche when he said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. So focusing on that why can pull us through some of the stresses that inevitably come with life and work, and can pull work teams through that stress as well. The second thing is you can't find purpose. I see all of these articles a lot about 10 ways to find your purpose, or 3 steps to find your purpose. And what happens when we say that you can go out and find your purpose is we become the opposite of mindful. We become mindless to the present moment. You have a reason for being where you are, doing what you're doing right now. There's a reason for you. If you're a human being on the planet and there's other human beings around you, you have a reason by default. Starting to think about what that reason is, even in the most mundane and routine tasks of your life, what the reason for that task is on the planet, you can awaken a sense of purpose. So I don't think you can find purpose, and that's why I call it awakening purpose. You already have it. And then finally, purpose isn't a statement or activity. It is a reason for existing that we must justify daily. We must answer the question, why me, why here, why now? And that's what this webinar is all about. And so I want to start with talking about the need for purpose in life. And what I want you to do is I want you to watch this short animation. It might be silent on the webinar for just a little bit. And I want you to tell me what the story is here, what's going on. So take a minute, it's only a minute and a half, and watch this animation and keep thinking to yourself, what's happening here? So what I want you to do is just think about and look at your own perceptions of what was going on. And when I do this, whether it's with CEOs or high school students, almost always people come up with some sort of emotional story. And you're probably thinking of one right now. All of a sudden, the big black triangle was some sort of bully, or the circle was a child, or it's some sort of workplace incident, or it represents thinking outside the box, or the rectangle that's just a rectangle on a white screen is someone's home and they're breaking out of their home. But the truth is I know what really happened here, and the answer might surprise you. The answer is absolutely nothing. Nothing happened in this animation. In fact, these are random shapes moving around on a random white screen. This was a 1944 psychological experiment by two psychologists named Hyder and Simmel. And what they did was they had graduate students create a flip book of random shapes moving around on a screen. And what they did was they showed it to people. And they asked a simple question: what was happening here? And almost everybody, almost every respondent, both from 1944 and until now when I work and I do this work with teams and people and individuals, people come up with an incredibly emotional story about what is happening. All of a sudden, the black triangle becomes a bully. We give a black triangle on a white screen intentions or actions. We say that was chasing this other circle, or it was angry or mad. You know, and I always laugh because I look at this triangle right here and I'm like, yeah, let me tell you something, that's an angry triangle if I've ever seen one. And that's what happens in our brain. This is chaos on a screen. And some of you all may be like, hey, no, there's definitely a story here, and you may be disagreeing with me, but just Google it, Hyder and Simmel, 1944 study in animation on attribution. But what this does is it proves that your brain, my brain, and every human brain is wired to search for purpose and meaning in chaos. And life is a bunch of stimuli, a bunch of things that happen to us. It's a bunch of behaviors, actions, observations of other people, work tasks. These are all things that are happening to us, and our brains are constantly trying to make meaning out of it. We're always searching for purpose, which is precisely why purpose is so powerful. Now, if you think about like how people develop emotional stories based on some black shapes moving around on a white screen, imagine in the workplace, the complicated interactions, nonverbal expressions of human beings. Imagine in friendships and relationships and families and life, when we're trying to make meaning of these complexities, how easy it is for our brain to just constantly be creating different meaning and a different orientation to our lives. And it's not surprising that our brains are wired this way. Dr. Ali Benazir from Harvard University did a study and an experiment, and he tried to think about what were the chances of us existing in our current form. Now, I'm going to get philosophical for a little bit because I was a philosophy major for a little bit at JMU, but he did this study of what are the chances of existing, and he talked to biologists and anthropologists, and what he found was that the chances of you being born as you, as a person, the chances of your biological parents meeting on Earth times about 10 to the 40th power since the beginning of time, and that lineage being biologically unbroken even before penicillin was created, in which the life expectancy was about 27, you had about a 1 in 400 quadrillion chance of being you, of existing. And so it's not a surprise that our brains are wired to figure out and find out why. It's a search that sort of dominated human beings' life. But this 1 in 400 quadrillion chance of you existing as you is powerful. It should, like, this already, if you don't remember anything from this webinar, just remember this, because we should wake up tomorrow, your alarm clock should look much differently. We should just be like, oh my gosh, we're alive. And why is that? We should be going to work every day being like, oh gosh, I just breathed oxygen on the way here. How are you doing? You should be looking around, if you're with anybody else right now, being like, there's human beings right here. And the miracle that comes with this is incredibly powerful to focus on and start shifting our mindset to be focused on why. Because what happens when we don't have a why, when we don't have a purpose, is that the actions and activities and decisions and behaviors in our daily life become sort of scattered. If you look at this top diagram here, it's looking towards a question mark. This is sort of what happens when we're purposeless. And I've seen this with teams and organizations, from around the world, that when people, they don't have an explicit sense of meaning that's stated, that's believed in, people sort of make up their own. And your activities, you just start making decisions at a whim, and you see this, it's sort of like, you can see the top, you're sort of moving forward here, but each of these arrows, to me, represents activities and decisions, and they're kind of just all going in one place. Purpose sort of acts like a magnet that pulls our activities and orients them. If you think about like the North Pole, it orients our work and our lives towards one consistent purpose and reason. And all of a sudden, our decisions start becoming aligned because we start thinking about this why consistently. And whether it's personal life or in teams, this harmonized energy that results from purpose is very powerful, because often in our lives we waste a lot of energy making decisions that aren't aligned with any sort of reason. And just like that animation showed, if we don't explicitly state a reason, and now this reason evolves over time, it can evolve daily, but if we don't explicitly state this reason for work teams or ourselves, we inevitably make up our own. This is one of the leading sources of workplace conflict that I found, is that it's not really about, oh, that person sent that email that had that sort of angry tone to the other person. It's really about, we just don't understand why we're sending this email. And we're not all on the same page as the purpose. So even in daily moments like that, a purpose can serve as a magnet that pulls and aligns activities, actions, and behaviors. And it can be very powerful in producing harmonized energy. So again, why purpose? Over the last century, we've made an incredible motivation mistake. And one of the biggest mistakes is that we've confused results with a purpose in life. We've structured our lives to be what-obsessed, result and data-focused, when in actuality, our brains are wired for emotion. Research has shown that our limbic brain, or the emotion center, is where most of our decision-making activity even takes place. And so we make decisions based on emotion. We get connected and committed to movements and organizations and things based on emotion, yet we structure our entire lives in our society and our educational systems based on things, based on what? Degrees, money, financial return, revenue, sales figures, salary. But the problem is that when we focus on results, when we live by results, we die by results. And this is where results motivation only lasts for so long. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But purpose is not results, and we can't confuse that. A reason for existence is not a result. So, a paycheck is not a result, for example. Like, no one ever created a job to pay you. Every job on the planet exists to solve some sort of human problem. Whether you're serving Slurpees at 7-Eleven, you are making somebody happy. You're literally serving frozen happiness to someone else to make them happy. Every job exists for a purpose to solve a human problem if it exists on planet Earth. Focusing on that is really powerful. A degree, I do a lot of work with college students, and a degree is a result. It's not a purpose. A major is a result. It's not a purpose. Those results, those things are either indicators of how valid your purpose are, or they're delivery systems to deliver your purpose. But when we just focus on those things, what happens is if one of them goes bad, our whole lives crumble. But this is why when we focus on a why, the reason for being, if we don't pass the LSAT or we get a bad score on the GRE, that's just one obstacle to delivering this broader why. And research has found consistently that having a purpose that focuses on others outside of yourself actually produces discipline and resilience and what Angela Duckworth calls grit. So focusing on things simply doesn't motivate people. You can look back at some of the most profound psychological experiments to just get an idea of this. In 1955, psychologists Nancy Morse and Robert Weiss, they did a landmark study on why people work. And for example, they found a critical error in thinking about work, that people only work for financial security. They were the ones that pioneered this lottery question. If you've ever been asked that, if you won the lottery, would you still work? And they did interviews with a random sample of over 400 employees, and what they found is that for most respondents, for the majority of respondents, work served as a critical function of making meaning out of life. And this quote that they stated from their study is powerful. It says, in fact, even if they had enough money to support themselves, people would still want to work. Working gives people a feeling of being tied to the larger society, of having something to do, of having a purpose in life. And Viktor Frankl, who we already talked about, did a similar study where he studied over 8,000 students at 48 colleges, and they were asked what was very important to them. Just 16% of people said that making a lot of money was important. 78% of respondents said that finding purpose and meaning was most important. And most recently, in the early 2000s, sociologist Reginald Bibby found that surveying 10,000 young workers who were in entry-level jobs, for example, said that interesting work, a sense of accomplishment, and adding something to people's lives were far more important than pay and job security. We want to be compelled, not just pushed and driven by some of these smaller things like salary or money or degrees. Those things push us shortly, but we want to be compelled as human beings. And one story to really highlight this is I do a lot of work with low-wage workers. So underprivileged, underrepresented, low-wage custodians here at CSU, Colorado State University, where I'm currently doing research. And I was in this interview with this one woman who started as a custodian 1, meaning she literally cleaned the toilet in a residence hall. And she built up enough money to be able to retire after over 25 years at the university. And get this, she came back out of retirement. This was a woman who had literally told me that she was just trying to put food on the table. And oftentimes people will tell me when I'm going into client meetings, oh, people just want to be paid well. Research indicates that's just not true. That's just not what motivates us. We want to be compelled. And I asked her, why did you come out of retirement? And she said to me that she was sitting at home and she couldn't stand the thought of a student in a residence hall not having a parent figure away from home. She had structured her work based on this purpose of being a parent figure away from home for students. There was no supervisor that told her to do that. She never got training on that. She didn't get rewarded for that. Financial compensation is terrible in these positions, as I'm finding. But she was compelled by finding purpose in cleaning a bathroom that resulted in being a parent figure away from home. It just happened that she was a custodian. So what's your why? What is the why of the things you do on a daily basis? And often when you start asking those questions and seeking your own story about your daily tasks can be really powerful. Motivation pushes us. The things we do pushes us. And Viktor Frankl said that, one of the immediate data of life experiences that man is pushed by drives and pulled by meaning. And let me give you just a brief physics overview from what I remember from physics. I was horrible at math, so I don't remember much. But I do remember this, that when you push something, there is a component of force that adds weight to the body and it creates more friction. When you pull something, the vertical component of force is against the weight of the object, and then there's less overall friction. There's some engineers in here that are like, you don't know what you're talking about, but I remember that. So it is easier to pull than push an object. It's why if your car breaks down, you don't call a push truck. You call a tow truck to pull you out of the situation. And what purpose does that motivation doesn't do is purpose provides something that we can strive for. It provides an opportunity for us to be pulled by something. Purpose is a reason for existence that is bigger than us. It inspires what researchers have called self-transcendence, to something bigger and more important than us. And it pulls us through the difficult times and the difficult circumstances. When we want to push our lives, often, like we use simple results, they're very short-lived and most of the time very expensive. But orienting our behavior towards something outside of ourselves that contributes to a larger cause or a larger movement is really, really powerful, and it can be awakened in the simplest of moments. So what is the purpose effect? So if purpose pulls us, what is the effect of this? And research is clear and incredibly powerful. The National Institutes of Health find that people who continually focus on purpose, focus on why instead of what, live up to 7 years longer. In an experiment of over 136,000 men and women, they found that there was a 23% reduction in mortality and a 19% reduction in cardiovascular events when people have a sense of purpose. People who continually think about and structure their lives and work around purpose are 42% more likely to be content in their work, and they're 2 times more likely to learn something new daily. And I see this in a lot of my work in education, and there's a psychologist who worked with high school students, and all he did was he took the most tedious tasks that high school students had to endure or go on about, and what he did was he had them do this brief exercise where they wrote down how high school could help them be a better person and impact the world. And he had them write that down a few times, and he had them listen to other students' stories, read other students' stories about the impact that high school made. Over the course of 2 months, he found a 0.2 increase in GPA from students who had regularly thought about purpose on these typically mundane and tedious tasks. It's powerful in terms of learning. And there's a great need for purpose at work. Many of you may be at work right now. 68.4% of workers in the U.S. are disengaged. Engagement means being enthusiastic, prideful, and happy about work. Just 68.4% of workers are disengaged. That's a huge number of disengagement. That means almost 27% of people, just 27%, feel engaged in their work. And only 13% of the world's population, the world's workforce, feels engaged and enthusiastic in their work. And here's the really disturbing part for me, is that the managers of these people are also disengaged. And this is from Gallup, the Gallup organization, and it's probably a bit biased because it's probably even worse than this, because people literally get a phone call and are asked 12 questions about whether they're engaged or not, and they qualitatively say no. But what does this happen at work? Well, people with purpose, through a number of studies, have been found to be 4 times more likely to be engaged at work, 50% more likely to be promoted, and it's the #1 factor in job satisfaction. And thinking what we've already talked about in regard to purpose and meaning, it's not surprising that purpose elicits discipline. It allows you to get through those mundane points of your day and life, which we all have no matter what job we're in, and it pulls us forward. And so how do we do this? How do we awaken purpose in our own lives? And what I've found through my own research is that there are 3 beliefs of purposeful leaders and purposeful people. The first is that the belief that what you do and that you matter deeply to the world. The belief that you matter. The second is this belief in a bigger why, a belief in a bigger purpose, just like that custodian that I mentioned earlier. She believed in something bigger than herself, and he was such a powerful, invisible leader that it pulled her out of retirement. And that's how powerful this can be. And the third thing is believing and proving your why every day. You know, I always tell organizations and teams, I was like, yeah, you know, you can create these beautiful recruitment posters and this wonderful mission that sounds awesome, but nobody cares about what you believe unless you prove it every single day. And so we're going to talk about some strategies around each of this area by first talking about the belief that you and what you do matters. And consider this question: how have you changed the world today? When I'm in front of audiences and I'm talking about this, almost everybody, either there's some nervous laughter or there's like a "this is really cheesy" comment, or there's just silence. And I think this is troubling. I was at a children's hospital working with a therapeutic recreation department, doctors who help kids feel better, typically an end-of-life situation. They had founded the department, and I asked them this question, and they couldn't answer it. And I think oftentimes we look to other people to change the world. We don't believe in our ability to do that in everyday moments. And when I talk to college students, they can't answer this question. They say, oh, I have to get a degree before I do that, or even high school students, or I'm too small to do that. But if I told you, hey, the guy giving this webinar today used recycled bicycle parts in Africa to create a windmill to power villages, you'd probably be like, oh, wow, I want to listen to this more. But if I said, hey, the guy doing this webinar today had a conversation with somebody once, you'd probably be like, yeah, okay, what? And exit the webinar. But that's me. That person is me. And I have one experience, and I tell this story all the time because it's the only story I have from my work, but it's incredibly powerful about what I mean by changing the world. There's me. And if Katie Young's on this webinar, that would be awesome. But I was an orientator. I was an OPA at JMU, and there was apparently, I didn't know why I was doing it until about 5 years after I stopped doing it. You know, I was doing it because it was cool. You got to wear a polo shirt. You had instant credibility, all those results, friends, all of that. But I didn't know why I was doing it until about 5 years after I stopped doing it. When I was in the middle of my master's program at CSU, I got an email from someone who said, hey, Zach, I saw on the Facebook, which is what it was called back then, that you're going into higher ed. I want to say thank you for getting me to where I'm at today. And I was a little bit confused, and I emailed back, and I was like, I don't know who you are. I'm sorry. I can get you in contact with the right Zach. And I'm not telling the story. It could have been any of you all. I don't remember anything about this. I don't even know if I'm still Facebook friends with the person. But she said, no, it was July. It was 2004. It was at James Madison University. I was at orientation, and I was absolutely miserable, and I was about to leave. And you veered off the path. You had a gold name tag in which your name sounded like Mercurio from Romeo and Juliet, and you said, hey, how's it going to me? And I was like, okay, this is weird. And I said, give me a call. And she called me, and we started talking, and she said that she was miserable because she didn't know what she wanted to do, and she felt like everybody else at orientation knew what she wanted to do. They were going into their intro to advising session that afternoon. And she said she was about to withdraw from the university. And apparently, I brought her to Harrison Hall, the journalism department, and the print journalism, and I simply told her to get connected with someone there. And that was apparently it. And I told her, she told me that, and I was like, okay. And I said, why is that important? She goes, well, I just got engaged to someone I met at work, and I realized that everything that I'm doing in my life, where I spend my life for over 35% of my waking week, the people that I see every day on the subway, the people that I've surrounded myself, the person that I may be spending the rest of my life with, I don't attribute it to my degree, a faculty member. I attribute it to a guy in a purple shirt veering off a path and saying hi. And I was like, okay, what's the kicker? And she told me that she was an assistant editor at a major magazine in New York City. And I realized in that moment why that job existed. And I wish, and the training is unbelievable. It's an unbelievable position. But I imagine if I went in the first day and people said to me, hey, your job exists to potentially have a conversation that would dramatically change the trajectory of a human being's life. And it could happen just once. 5:30 a.m. would have looked a lot differently to me. You know, instead of getting a binder and learning everything to say and what to say and how to say it, I would focus on those conversations, which was the purpose of the job. And one of the tips in this area to believe that you matter is to make imagination a habit. You have to imagine impact. The only way to experience possibility is through imagination. And I think about my work all the time and my involvement in college, and I wonder, like, if I had just imagined with every conversation what impact it would have on that person's life, how much more intentionally I would focus on that. And focusing on the little things that you do is incredibly powerful. And in the workbook, there's an exercise at the end that is a change map, and it helps you reframe that perspective. You know, try this today. Just pick one thing that you did today and track how that may have changed the world. Think about the next step, the ripple effect, the chain reaction. And it's going to feel like cheesy at first, and I get that. But then all of a sudden, you have to come to this realization that something is going to happen after you connect with that person. They're going to go do something. They're going to talk to someone else. And it just might be that thing that you imagined. And that can be really powerful in reframing our perspective. You know, Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited to all we know now and understand now, and imagination embraces the entire world. Cultivating a life and work teams and organizations that are centered on imagining the impact of what we do on other people can be really profound and powerful. Adam Grant, a psychologist at the Wharton School, did a landmark study, and he looked at telemarketers for universities, so sort of like the Madison call center that we all have here. It's a high turnover job. It's really difficult for students to do, as you can imagine if anybody's ever worked in telemarketing work or fundraising work. And what he did was he brought in a student that experienced a scholarship and that positively impacted their life. And to one shift, he showed that story to them for 5 minutes. It was a 5-minute story. Another shift of people, he just didn't do anything. Now, before students heard the story, of the person whose life was impacted by the scholarship, they were bringing in about $183 per caller per week. The students, after they heard the story, after 6 months, on average, brought in over $503 per caller per week. The students who didn't hear the story, the shift who didn't hear the story, stayed flat, stayed constant. This is a landmark study that shows that when we focus on the people, the end result of whatever job it is, even if it's telemarketing, even if it's custodial work, that if we focus on that job, we actually perform better in it and we find more fulfillment in it. This is just a powerful idea of an exercise you could do with your team or yourself, just bringing someone in, being a storyteller, being a story collector. KPMG, big accounting firm, the same thing. They were sort of competing and trying to differentiate based on what way they do. They're an audit firm. It's very difficult to differentiate in that space. And they simply started mining their history, looking at their history and why the company existed in the first place. And they did amazing things. They did things like certify the election of Nelson Mandela, negotiate the Lend-Lease agreement for Nazi Germany. And so they started talking about those things at work. Well, they uploaded this, created this app where the people, the audit associates, again, high turnover job, low morale job at times, where they could start talking about their purpose. And they were able to upload posters like the things you see here. We champion democracy. I combat terrorism. I help farms grow. Talk about the purpose of their work. They wanted, employees to turn in about 10,000 of these. This was their goal. In a couple of months, they had 40,000 entries. People were yearning to talk about purpose. And it resulted in an 8.1% global growth for KPMG, a 4% reduction in turnover of the high turnover staff. They rose to the top of Fortune's 100 places to work list, the highest ranking ever of a Big Four accounting firm, and they got more client referrals and more repeat business. When people focus on that purpose, whether it's at work or in life, they become more committed and more emotionally committed. It pulls them through some of the drudgery of our jobs and our lives. So a tip is to focus on the greater good of every task, the people, especially the mundane or the routine. Consistently focus on that, and it's incredibly powerful. Another tip here is to be a storyteller and a story collector, changing the narrative. Often when I'm working with organizations, I sit around the water cooler, or I just hear what people talk about on campus. The three things that people talk about the most, I found, in work and in life are talking about how busy they are, complaining about some sort of management or leadership, or counting down the days to the weekend. And I always tell people, no matter how compelling your job is or how much you love your job, like if people are living for 2/7 of their life for the weekend, there's probably something wrong. That narrative is your culture. It's who you are. It's why you are. And starting to tell the stories of the impact that you serve can be extremely powerful. I recently worked with bus drivers for a school district, and I sat around their break room, and that's what I found. I found that the stories that were being told sort of dictated the morale. And we just reframed things to start telling stories of the impact of the work, of the purpose of the work. And it started to really change this narrative, and we can do this in our own lives as well. So the second belief is the belief in a bigger why. So you believe that what you do matters, but this belief in a bigger why is powerful. And again, purpose is the reason for which something is done or created. So the belief in the reason for existence, the reason for a task's existence is incredibly powerful. Many of you have probably heard the NASA janitor story where John F. Kennedy was about to launch the Apollo missions. And JFK was in a budget crisis, and he was in a hangar, and he bumped into this custodian, and he said, "Hey, what do you do here?" And the custodian very calmly got up and said, "Oh, Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon." And the president, apparently, and this is a fable, reframed his perspective of, I'm putting a man on the moon, but it's not about what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. When we all transcend to this bigger purpose, it's powerful. But that's where the story typically ends. I want you to imagine if that janitor believed it every day. Imagine him getting up on Monday morning, the car breaks down, he defaults on a bank loan. Imagine him being like, "Oh, darn, you know what? I really don't want to go to work today and put a man on the moon." Or, "Hey, it's Wednesday, hump day, just a couple more days of putting the man on the moon." It's really hard when you have a deep belief in why you do what you do to not have your attitude be changed by it. So state your purpose. keep it visible, and try to detach it from results and outcomes. That purpose is in front of you always, and I included a purpose statement template there for you. It can be incredibly powerful. So state it, state that why. Try to consciously detach it from outcomes. This is a great way that I've found to do this just in my own life, but then in some clients' lives as well, that saying I exist to do what, for who, to get them to do something or feel something. Try filling this in. Try doing it right now. You know, mine is I exist to inspire people and organizations to find and deliver their authentic purpose. And then when you start reading these things out loud, or you do it with your team and they read these, you're going to be blown away, because like everybody's a TED Talk, just waiting to be unleashed. But then imagine if everybody on your team or everybody in your life believed it to their core. And that's what happened, you know, that's what happens with this janitor story. We get compelled by it, but you got to imagine believing it. It changes everything. Another tip is to tell the story of the problem you solve, not only the solutions that you offer. So stating the problem is incredibly powerful. So, for example, I was doing this work with a group of nonprofits here in northern Colorado with their executive directors and their board members. And I asked them, what's the biggest problem your organization faced? If I were to ask you right now what you think that is, many people would say, oh, it's money. We can't raise enough money. But that's not their problem. Their problem were things like ending homelessness, or feeding children, or making sure that kids had a voice. These were compelling organizations. But what happened is in their fundraising, they were focused on things like, hey, can you give us money because we're trying to build a new building? And nobody really cares about that. Like, nobody cares, hey, if someone were to come to me and say, hey, can I get money to build a new building? I would say, oh, I'll be able to make excuses. Oh, you know, maybe not. Right now we're tied up in other areas. But if someone came to me and said, hey, can you give us money to end homelessness? I'd be very hard-pressed to be able to say no. And that's what happens when we focus on the problem we solve, the human problem we solve, and everything we do solves a human problem. It can be powerful in communicating that. And then this final question, and this is the final point before I'll open it up for questions, is the belief that improving your purpose, improving it daily. And this is the kind of the standard that I try to use with people and organizations, is how can every person who interacts with you or your organization at every single level know and feel why you exist? Not be able to, you know, tell us what we do or what we do well, but know why we exist. And this final belief is crucial, the belief in proving why consistently. And Southwest Airlines provides a great example of this. In 2010, consultants said, hey, you're losing $300 million a year because you're not charging for bags. And the CEO went back into the organization's history and found out why the organization was started in the first place. And it was founded by Herb Kelleher to democratize the skies, to provide financial access to air travel that was not contingent upon your socioeconomic status. And he went to the consultant and said, we're not doing it. He sent out a memo to all of the employees and said, if we don't save $300 million this year, we are going to have to charge for bags and go against why we exist. They ended up saving over $700 million that year. People came up with creative ways to be more efficient. And then they created the Bags Fly Free campaign, which was completely opposite of what everybody was doing. But they were aligned by their purpose, and they proved it. And they made additional $1 billion of revenue based on going against the norm and staying true to purpose. That power of proving purpose is powerful, and we prove it through our actions and decisions, however tiny, every single day. So one way to do this is start reflecting on what actions and attitudes in your life don't align with your purpose. So go back today, I know you're going to be thinking about purpose all day now, but go back to your mission statement or that purpose statement and think about like why you do what you do, and then think about how you think when you wake up, what you think about when you're doing these sort of mundane tasks in your work, what the narrative is around your work, and sort of align those and identify ones that don't align with your purpose. Another powerful way is to identify barriers that you see in delivering your purpose consistently and living with these beliefs of believing that you matter, believing in your why, and believing and proving why. You know, oftentimes I just worked with a group and we had them go through barriers, and I find the similar things all the time. Time, money, stress, health, that becomes your personal development plan. Those barriers that you identify are the barriers that are not allowing this blue box, this current state, to move towards this ideal vision. And those are the things that if you can focus on mitigating those barriers to purposeful work, then those catalysts, those things in your life, those things in your work that really do make you feel like you matter and that you're purposeful are really powerful, and it can allow them to take. This is a very old change theory from Kurt Lewin back in the day, actually. And so thinking about devoting your time and resources this upcoming year to not necessarily making resolutions, but looking at these barriers to purposeful work and purposeful living is powerful to get the benefits of purpose. And these barriers, like, for example, I had one student say that I'm always stressed. Well, then it becomes, what's your plan around that? Do you adopt mindfulness? And it's not just adopting mindfulness because the Huffington Post blog said I should. It's adopting mindfulness to deliver my purpose, you know, for this person who was graduating students. So identify barriers and spend resources mitigating them. There's a great exercise in the workbook that's really powerful. And then my final tip for everybody here is to redesign and reimagine your environment. We are our environments. We are our narratives. And a meaningful life or organization does feel three things. You feel significant, you feel like you make a difference in people's lives, and you feel like you're growing as a whole person. Self-gratitude, self-affirmation, affirmation of others, storytelling, the reinforcement of purpose as we talked about, building community, getting involved in other like-minded people is incredibly powerful. So changing your environment to focus on these three things, the things you see every day, the things you talk about every day, is incredibly powerful. And so I want to leave now because I know I went a little bit over time, but we have about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes for questions. But I'd love to connect with you all on the blog or on social media to talk more about it. And again, you have that workbook which goes into a lot more detail and provides you background, and those exercises can be used for individuals or with teams and can be really powerful. So thanks for your attention. I know that was a lot, but I could probably spend 4 days talking about it.
Thanks so much, Zach. And as you guessed, we have a couple questions already coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into those for you. We do have a question here. This person asked, do you have any insight for those that due to maybe life circumstances have been in the same non-purpose-driven career for many years, and how later in life they can still bring out their purpose, whether that's within work or outside of the work environment?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think that one of the things that to recognize is that purpose is also a mindset. And so really taking a look at what are those areas of your life where you do feel these things, like you feel like you matter, you feel like you're purposeful, and then identifying what are those situations that elicit that feeling for me and how do I replicate them in other areas of life. And what I found, so I work with people who literally are in the worst socioeconomic situations in our country. I work with low-wage service workers. And this is one of the most powerful things for them. They're in work that they don't experience as particularly glamorous. But what they've done is be able to create that mindset to start focusing on other people more actually than themselves, and it helps to create a sense of purpose. So if you've been in work for a long time and it's kind of worn you down, taking this new perspective on your day, in collecting stories of the people that you have impacted is really, really powerful.
That's, yep, really good advice for those listening in, still trying to figure out, you know, what that purpose is. I really liked how you said that it's not something that we have to really search for or find, that it's already, we already have it. So I think that's pretty comforting for a lot of us.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, it is comforting because I think there's so much pressure to go like find your purpose. And what I found is that excludes so many people from purpose. You know, it excludes people who don't have the means to go on like a week-long retreat or participate in this kind of freelance like gig economy. And that's why I focused a lot of my time on working with people who are in sort of these service-based professions, because I think we can learn a lot from that experience.
Absolutely. Here's a good one. Maybe you can throw in some of that research, the PhD candidate background.
Sure.
So we have a question here. How do you see generational changes in people's purpose or even their sense of need for purpose? Do baby boomers put as much emphasis on purpose, and do their purposes differ drastically from millennials?
Yeah, the generation stuff. So I got to be honest. I'm going to be just straight up honest. I'm not huge into the generational. I'm not a huge fan of the generational research because if you look at the research, it all comes down to values. And different generations, because of the different environments they come in, have different values. And none of the values are like particularly bad. But I think what's happened, and a great book I recommend is called The Purpose Economy by Aaron Hurst. And what's happened is that because of our interconnectedness, because we can see problems in the world more clearly and more instantaneously that we haven't been able to see in past generations, we can see war-torn Syria on our TV screen, where it would take a week to really digest that information in print years and years ago, is that people have become more in this generation, because they've grown up in this, have become more attuned to wanting to help and wanting to find purpose. Deloitte did a great study on millennials, for example, that found that they are looking for organizations and work that allows them, gives them a path to make a difference in the world. The societal benefit of the organization is one of the most powerful aspects of a millennial deciding to either do business or to work with the organization. But I don't think that's just millennials. I think everybody seeks to do good. Like if I were to say, hey, raise your hand right now if you want to benefit the world, nobody's going to say no. But it's just millennials, I think, have seen it more up front and up close, how they can do that.
Right. Another question we have, one of our participants says that I do desire to follow purpose, but as a husband and father of 3 kids, you do strive to work toward your niche and regularly question your value, so you have a fear of losing that. So based on that, how do you get beyond your fear of striving toward your why with the sacrifice of losing your value and successfully raise a family? This seems like a major culture shift for most companies.
Huge culture shift, huge mindset shift. And I would argue that when we focus on purpose, actually the value and results follow. There's a good amount of research on financial return of purpose in terms of when organizations, and Jim Collins in Good to Great, for example, studied many corporations, and he found that organizations that put the benefit of others and focus on the problem they solve first, and they create a culture that do that, actually outperform their market peers by an average of 6 to 1. And so it's often a real mindset shift to not be able to see the immediate results, but from a long-term sustainability perspective, research has found that it does show more financial return. Now I have a 2-year-old right now, and I'm in the same position of figuring out what the future holds and trying to, cling to security. But oftentimes security follows a meaningful purpose, and you hear stories about that all the time. But I think one thing that companies can do is simply, 13% of the world's workforce indicates self-reports they're engaged in their work. And I think if companies just started to redefine management, for example, as you're responsible for over 35% of someone's waking life over time, and recognize that those people do go home and they do talk about work with their family and they do raise kids and they vote in our society, then I think that they would be more of a case for the societal need for purpose, which will inevitably, I think, help the business and produce more security.
Absolutely. We have time for one last question. And then I'm sure, since your information's up there, any questions that we don't get to, Zach has provided his information on the last slide there, and you could send those to him directly. But this last one, does or can purpose change over time, or do you think we just become more aware of our purpose with experience?
Okay, I don't want to get super philosophical here, but I am going to get super philosophical, because one of the things that I think purpose changes moment to moment. I mean, like and this is the problem, like if we identify, stating that broader purpose, you can use that purpose statement template for your family, why you exist as a parent or as a friend, or why you exist in an organization. But there's also this idea of awakening purpose in everyday moments. Like, for example, if you're at the coffee shop and there's a person behind you that you could say hi to them, like you have a reason and a purpose there. And I think that what's happened is over time, and because of a lot of the popularization of purpose through a lot of bestsellers and airport books and things like that, that we see purpose as this like ideal that we have to like just go after. But I think it evolves in all of our different moments as we think about it. And over time, what you're going to find is you're going to find a theme for you. Like you're going to find a theme that connects what you love to do, what you care about in the world, who you care about, and then the overlap of how do you make a living doing that. And that's, I think, where you start to really mold a more coherent life purpose over time. But yeah, I think it could change every day.
Absolutely. Well, Zach, I want to thank you so much for your time. This was a really inspirational way to kickstart the new year. Like you said, it is more than a resolution, and it's really cool how we can, use these resources and tools that you've provided to find that purpose, or not find, I guess, discover what's already there within us in our purpose. In our daily lives and how we have that impact. I think it's really cool too. I like the question.